Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Today's video is regarding unity, division, and the birth of Britain. And it's going to be an amalgamation of current affairs and the history of the English-speaking people, and the inspiration is in fact a collection of books that I bought from the second-hand bookshop at the Erdig National Trust House and Gardens. Erdig is located just a couple of miles south of Wrexham in northwest Wales, and it is Winston S. Churchill's History of the English-Speaking People, first volume, the birth of Britain. And the reason why I wanted to get into it is because, first and foremost, the birth of Britain, the first chapter is entitled Britannia, the second subjugation, and third Roman province. So really, the foundation of what we would consider civilized modern Britain comes from a form of invasion and subjugation. So I found that interesting in relation to kind of recent events, because when we look at the history of the English-speaking people, even prior to recent modern history and recent affairs, as I've spoken about in the past, you're talking about Celts, Welsh, Scots, Pikes, and after that Danes, heathens, Northmen, and then after that Franks, Normans, Europeans. And basically when the Romans came, there was an interesting point made that the first time that you had some basic things many people take for granted, heating, warmth, baths, just general hygiene and decent quality of life, this was introduced by the Romans and pretty much disappeared when they disappeared, right up until the Victorian period. So I guess what I'm trying to get at here in the madness of Manchester city centre is that whether it be the Danes, whether it be the Normans, whether it be the Romans, the development and evolution of Britain has always been a relationship between foreign people. So if you think about the positioning of the island, it's quite vulnerable really to attack, once of course attached to the mainland, although it has some defences in relation to the North Sea and the English Channel. It's quite a vulnerable just hop on a boat, come over. And I guess look, the unity and division is that actually what has been the great success of this island is consistently evolving and adapting when necessary. When, for example, the Romans came, they brought with them new religion. There's something going on over here, so I'm going to take a little look because we're in town. I've got a fella right in front of me, looks like my father. High vis, so it could be something rather interesting. But what I want to jump into as well is like what there is to be proud of. Winston Churchill, for example, speaks about, you have like to the north and the west, you have this more extreme terrain in relation to maybe like the lakes and the peaks and the North Welsh mountainous scenery, and then to the south you have a more gentle downs, more rolling hills, you have a more subtle landscape. And I think what it is to say that one is obviously going to be connected and feel connection, but feel a sense of belonging in the place that they are from. But this should not come at the expense of alienation, resentment, and separation to all other, human folk. Like, what difference does it really make? Yes, of course, we love the land we are from, but all land, and this is of course in the Islamic tradition, you have really the fact that all lands and all people are from God. So why, this land is beautiful, yes, but all lands are beautiful. All are kind of have an equal aesthetic because they are creation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I don't have a connection to, the plains of Africa or Asia, because that's not where I'm from. So, but that's not to say that I think they are any less beautiful. It's just that you are who you are. You come where you come from. And so it is just the old issue of unity and division, the way that we look at things. Britain is a country by definition that has actually historically benefited from foreigners, like the Romans, the Danes, and the Normans, all brought with them their own benefit to society. Now those were straight up invasions. The difference with the modern time is that there's no invasion going on. This is like straight invitation or legitimate fleeing of conflict that has been caused by this country. So it's rather amusing, basically. So arguably we look back in relation to the birth of Britain at the Romans, and we then considered ourselves in many ways to just be another province of the Roman Empire, good and proper Roman citizens. So interesting how initially an invasion can very quickly become assimilation and an identity and a pride, because it depends what they bring. So when the Romans brought peace and order and hygiene and stability in relation to food and housing, and kept away threat of foreign invasion, then the people loved it. Same thing with the Normans, what they brought in relation to government, and for example, they were some of the earliest people to start to add more stipulations for equality, the removal of slavery on the island, etc. So my whole point here that I'm getting at is that really I see, in relation to the current tensions, which ultimately is just straight Islamophobia, is that actually we have another cycle of this, because one should look at what they can learn from, for example, the people of the Commonwealth. The people of the Commonwealth did not choose Britain. Britain chose them, because in many ways it was, like, say, the colonial past of Britain that can either be something that lifts us all up, something that can unite us and connect us, or it can be something that continues to have a bitter taste in the mouths of the people because of its history of subjugation. So it really depends which way you look at it. But I'd certainly recommend the first volume of Winston Churchill's book, The History of the English-Speaking People, The Birth of Britain, because it allows you to understand that we really are a crock pot of different people, different nationalities, different ethnicities. And although people will at first glance say, oh, well, these are Caucasian identities, it's like, well, at that point it's just straight racism, isn't it? So I guess what I want to say is that I think that the future is something to look forward to, something positive, but ultimately, at the same time, I do feel slightly disenchanted about the state of the nation. And something I do want to confirm is that what is generally being referred to as the UK riots is something that's only really happening in the nation of England. Wales and Scotland seem to be pretty absent from the whole situation. And there's probably some wisdom to that too. It generally seems to be targeting northern towns and cities where there's more deprivation, there's a lower socioeconomic cluster of folk who are participating. It's all very sad because, as Malcolm X said, I believe, when there's no safety, there's no freedom. So if people cannot, well within their rights, choose to dress in religious garments, then the society has crumbled. And I think that the government, to be fair, and the law enforcement have done a fantastic job at fundamentally keeping people safe. But this is what I wanted to say as well about the book. When I was reading it, it really struck me about what we take for granted up until literally just a few generations ago. We, even, like say just a couple hundred years ago, even the kings were not bathing in hot water. The Romans certainly brought that to the island, but when they left, that pretty much left with them. So I think that it's important for us, even if we're of the lowest socio-economic class, instead of blaming and vilifying people of different ethnicities and backgrounds, we should be grateful for what it is in fact that we do have, that in relation to history is an incredible blessing. And this is what it already comes down to again, is that the Muslim, the believer, his life is focused around gratitude in all times, shukr. It's been said that Islam is encompassed by both gratitude and patience. So Islam is 50% sabr, patience, and 50% gratitude, shukr. And so in all times we should be grateful, because even if we're facing a trial or tribulation, that trial is in fact a blessing in and of itself, because of what it can teach us and the kind of hormetic effect it may have. When we go through tough times, we become tougher and stronger and are battle hardened. And in overcoming a particular trial, kind of a commonly associated negative trial, then again, Allah tests those who he loves. It says in the Quran, did you think that we would not test you? Did you not think that there would be, it's not all plain sailing, smooth sailing. Life is not simply a, bed of roses, as they say. So it's a combination of gratitude, patience. So patience in times of hardship, gratitude in times of good, obedience as often as possible, And that's also gratitude comes if you're living an obedience life, you will gain the prosperity in this world and the next. And then repentance in times of disobedience. So I've extracted that from Hamza Yusuf from a little lecture I was listening to last night. But it's not that complicated. It's not that difficult to be grateful for the fact that, look, even if you've got cold water, you're taking another breath, another day on God's green earth. So I find it's all very toxic, and it's all very sad that the drive to violence, fascism, is present in society, and the fact that an opportunity has arisen that allows it to come to the surface is one thing, but what's more fascinating in my mind is the fact that it's actually there the whole time anyway. And there are people who don't realize, and this is now going into a different topic, but I'll go there anyway. People don't realize that I can't help but feel that this is, in many ways, obviously it will be subdued initially, but I can't help but feel that really in many ways it's just the beginning, because I've spoken about in the past in relation to the demographics. The demographics are clear cut. You have an increasing percentage of children in the school system who are Muslim. You have an increasing percentage of the major cities, London, Manchester, Birmingham, etc., becoming Muslim. Soon they will be a majority in these cities. You just have an increasing number in relation to birth rate. So as the ethnic natives fail to reproduce, and as the ethnic minorities continue to stay well above replacement, the demographic changes are simply going to continue. So what that effectively means is that the problems essentially are not going away. The sentiment that is here is not going away. And that also, alongside that increasing demographic situation, you're also going to have increased disparity of wealth, which is also something fundamental fundamentally at the base of the problem. I'm just going to sit back and take my shoes off. So these are the main points. Unity and division. We're all human at the end of the day. It's just, I feel like I'm going back to my hippie roots, my tie-dye trousers and my daily cannabis consumption. It's just like, we're all human, man, we're all one. But it's like, we are. And it's so bizarre that you have kind of an ambiguous trope perpetuated by minority extremist or fascist groups, predominantly ultra-nationalist, obviously hate groups, that the ambiguous trope is basically focused around this fanaticism, which, ultimately Islam, it's closely related, although a better translation would be submission. It's closely translated to peace. In Arabic, you have a root word situation. SLM, salam, is peace, but Islam is submission. So I don't know, I guess I wanted to jump on and just say that, look, whether we're Christian or secular, I just struggle to see why we can't unify. And I'll go on to this as well. As I was walking into town, there was a fella who literally had a speaker larger than a backpack. It was just this huge speaker. It was almost like the size of one of these huge logs. And he was carrying it around. He was blasting garage music, incredibly loud. Everybody was looking around, looking at him. Now, I find it interesting, the kind of difference between freedom and law and order, because what's the difference if, for example, the call to prayer was broadcast on microphones, on loudspeakers? Then I think that you'd have this kind of, ultra-nationalist group, or the English folk, up in arms about noise pollution, up in arms about, the fact that this call to prayer is going off in the middle of the morning and they'd rather lie in bed and sleep. But at the same time, do we not have a right to blast out garage music through a speaker in the middle of town? Or, as I'm walking into town, you've got nothing but the hustle and bustle, all the cars driving through. It's pretty hectic. And so I think that you can kind of cut it both ways. You can argue that one has a right to do something, but it's always going to be that kind of juxtaposition of somebody's right has the potential to infringe, somebody's right to act has the potential to infringe upon somebody's right to not be affected by that action. So it's fascinating stuff, but I mean, like I say, disenchanted to a degree, because it's made me realize that, maybe, although my intention was to go to Egypt for, a relatively short period of time, it's making me think, what am I coming back to the UK for? I love the UK because, like I've said at the start of the video, I am amongst the population of English-speaking people. And also, by the way, is all of the Muslims that are in Britain. If you speak English, if you work in England, you pay taxes in England, you understand the culture, you may also have a heritage from another place. In that sense, you are kind of you're sort of bi-heritage, you're bilingual, you're bi-heritage. You have your foot in, like, I guess here, you've got the sand and the grass, and you can stand in between the two. It's making me realize, like, although yes, the healthcare here is good, so that works well in relation to having children, then I also think, like, if you move in the Islamic tradition, if you move to Muslim lands for the sake of Allah, for the sake of your religion, for the sake of your iman, for your deen, for your education, for your study, to become a student of knowledge, to grow, to protect your family from the hellfire, to allow them to grow up in a place that is more aligned with the family values, then Allah is going to protect your child through the birth canal. And even if by the will of God you lose a child, then it's all written. Life is written anyway. So it's making me realize, like, what am I coming back to the UK for? I have family here, of course, and I love them dearly, and I obviously want to see them. But when I've analysed it, and this is now kind of unity and division, the birth of Britain and Hijra, because when I've analysed it, currently residing in the northwest in Manchester, and my family living in, for example, Buckinghamshire and Cornwall, well, seeing them, going to Cornwall 3-4 times a year, going down south maybe like 9-10 times a year, spending long weekends and such, I'm thinking, what if I live abroad and just come back to the UK for a straight month? I'm still going to basically see everybody a relatively equal amount of time. So that's something to consider. And I just think that, like, if we do enjoy it there, and we have the call to prayer, and we have a teacher, and we're, embedded into the Egyptian Arabic culture and language, and the cost of living is good, and we're going to be living, inshallah, in a nice place, we'd be returning to the UK, and our lifestyle, the quality of our lifestyle would diminish. And this is purely practical, this is purely lifestyle, let alone the tensions between the Muslims and non-Muslims on this island. I mean, the United Kingdom typically has always been, relatively speaking, a good place for Muslims. But it just makes me think, like, even my friends and family, who again I love dearly, but we're on different paths. My path is Islam. My path is the the straight path. My path is to raise my children and protect them and give them kind of full spiritual awareness, rather than get them locked into the lifestyle of going to school, going to university, getting in debt, getting a mortgage, staying in debt, working in a system where you just, what you have to ask the questions, what is the purpose of life? What do we want to do? Now, obviously there's comfort in the place that you grew up in, there's comfort knowing the language, but these things very quickly can change. And so the unity comes beautifully in relation to Islam, that whether we are black, white, yellow, green, whether we are from whichever continent we're from, we can unify because we're human, because we're believers, because there's more that unifies us than divides us. And the division is straight hate, is straight shaitan. And even just having, one iota of stress or tension or worry or fear relating to living a life of safety and therefore freedom makes me think, like, how ironic is it that people love to point the finger at theocracies and different human rights issues around the world, but then it's like, no country's perfect, man. No country's perfect. And the birth of Britain came out of literally the subjugation of the Roman Empire on the indigenous, like, Celtic people of this island. And the benefit of that subjugation has echoed thousands of years later. So I find that fascinating, that actually through subjugation, through invasion, through conflict, actually on the other side is benefit for the society at large. And that's the main point that I wanted to say, is that there's actually, there's hope on the other side of the horizon, because if the initial people could assimilate into that's the crazy thing, isn't it? So the indigenous people, the ultra-nationalist people currently, they're claiming that the Muslims should assimilate to British culture. But what I'm saying is that actually British culture, the history of the British Isle, has actually been an assimilation to the people that come here. So the future of this island, based on that sentence and based on the resistance of this kind of extremist right-wing fascism from the everyday people, who generally are actually quite reasonable and socialist and caring and, what would be the word I'm looking for? I mean, there's the whole thing with progressivism is that they kind of have to accept the religious diversity, even if the religious diversity doesn't necessarily accept the principles of the progressives. So the conclusion here really is one of optimism and a claim, and I'm really happy in fact that the riots in England have now made me realise that what's best for this island is actually assimilation to the Muslims. The Muslims should not be, because the issue is that the Muslims cannot fully assimilate to British culture, because we're not going to drink alcohol, because we're not going to structure our family in this new kind of postmodern, post-nuclear family way. It is traditional, it is old school. And again, by taking a slice of humble pie and eating it slowly, we'd actually realise that the values of the Muslims are quite closely aligned to, for example, the Victorian Christian values that we had only just a few generations ago. So I guess that's where I'll end it there. Unity and division is two sides to the same coin. You can separate yourself and distance yourself from anybody, or you can find common ground with people, because ultimately that's quite easy to do as human beings. We're all children. We're all children of God, man. No, I mean, we're all children, and we all have parents. And if we haven't got parents because they passed on, well, we're all human. And like I say, the birth of Britain, the story of Britain has been one of adapting, and in a uniquely British way, adapting to the people that have come to this island throughout the centuries, throughout the millennia. And actually, what Churchill says in the book is that, you know, day to day our lives don't change. We look 5 years in the future, and that's actually quite a long time. 20 years is pretty much on the horizon. We can't conceptualize much longer than that. And then 50 years is a full-on lifetime, but things generally change over, you know, a lifetime or two, multiple generations. And so, you know, when people make these predictions as to where Britain will be, for example, in 2050 or 2075, or, you know, by the time our grandchildren are our age, you know, this country will be radically different. And it will go two ways, because, you know, the current trends continue, then reason and Islam and diversity will reign, and a uniquely British form of a multicultural, multi-religious, tolerant society will reign supreme, or there'll be a kickback from, you know, fascist right wing, and we'll return to war like we did before. I doubt, there's just not enough numbers for that to happen now. And, you know, the atrocities of the 20th century have taught us a lot. So anyway, I could ramble on for forever. The main thing is unity over division, peace over conflict, remembering that the reality of this island is one of ethnic diversity. Interesting that these UK riots effectively almost exclusively happened in England. Wales and Scotland were pretty quiet, because Wales and Scotland have been victim to the subjugation of the English historically. And although I think that's reprehensible, and I think that, you know, the Scottish Gaelic and the Welsh languages should be, you know, thrust forward, as they're certainly present, I know, on the passports. Each people should have their own individual identity, but unify under one British identity. And I think that was the success of the Roman Empire. If people were Roman citizens, then they were citizens of the entire world, the free world, and they benefited from, you know, their package of grain and their feeling of being a part of something that ensured their safety. So it's really just a call to, I know that people won't, because nobody of this kind of ilk of right wing is going to be watching this video 33 minutes in, but I wish that they did just read more history and philosophy and theology to just grow a little bit in their understanding, and realize that, you know, Christianity and Islam and Judaism are cousin faiths, and ultimately we should be working together for the prosperity of humanity. And it's just so shocking how quickly we can get our backs up against the fence and start butting horns. And finally, you know, what ended up entering the video was a contemplation on why I'm living in the UK, other than the fact that I was born here, raised here, educated here, I'm comfortable here. And what I mean by comfortable is it's familiar, I'm used to it, but I'm not necessarily incredibly comfortable in relation to, I'm going to be more comfortable moving to a Muslim country, because the quality of life will be increased, and I have no worries around, for example, what often people will start talking about in relation to safety and human rights. I actually have more concern about that here, to be honest. So anyway, anybody who's listened this far is certainly part of the tribe. They should subscribe, they should like the video, they should absolutely big up their good selves, and really appreciate people, if they have listened for 34.5 minutes, then subhanallah, that to me is miraculous, because I don't even know what I've said in the last 35 minutes. It's just been a cathartic rant. Hopefully there's been some small benefit. Any benefit comes from Allah. All mistakes and errors are my own. And until next time, good folk, Alvida Sane.